Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping into a really fascinating analysis of America's nuclear strategy. It's all about the story the U.S. tells the world and how that story stacks up against the cold, hard laws of physics. So yeah, let's get right into it. So, the story you usually hear, right? It's all about how the U.S. nuclear arsenal is just unmatched, technologically dominant. We're talking about a narrative of these super smart surgical weapons, the absolute peak of military tech. And this whole idea of tech dominance, it's really built on this promise of absolute security. The message is that America's nuclear shield isn't just strong, it's basically unbreakable, completely invulnerable. But, and this is a big but, the source material we're looking at today argues that this is a very carefully crafted story. It's a narrative that's designed to make us feel safe, to reassure us, but it might not actually line up with the physical reality of it all. Okay, so the first thing we've got to unpack is this official story. The source we're digging into calls it the reassurance narrative. Think of it as the polished, public-facing version of America's nuclear power. So this narrative, it basically says our modern weapons are so incredibly accurate, right? So accurate that they don't have to be these city-flattening monster bombs anymore. The whole idea, the main talking point, is that precision takes the place of brute force. It paints this picture of controlled, restrained, almost responsible power. But here's where the analysis really turns a corner. It asks a super important question. Does this whole story about surgical precision actually hold up when you put it next to the unbending, unforgiving laws of physics that govern a nuclear explosion? Does it make sense? And that right there brings us to the absolute heart of the technical argument in this analysis. It's this crucial difference between being precise and being truly powerful, especially when we're talking about nuclear weapons. All right, the single most important word you need to know here is yield. Just forget about accuracy for a second. Yield. That's the raw, explosive power of a weapon. It is the real measure of how destructive it is. It's the one thing that determines the sheer scale of the devastation. And the source makes this distinction crystal clear. Look, accuracy is great for hitting a very specific target, let's say a hardened missile silo. But yield is what determines the size of the blast, the fireball, and the pure, raw, destructive power that just wipes out everything in a massive area. I mean, that just completely reframes how you think about this, doesn't it? We're so used to thinking of weapons as tools, things we control. But this analysis argues that a nuclear explosion, it's not a tool. It's more like a geological event, an earthquake, a volcano. And get this, here's the real kicker from the analysis. The source points out that the U.S. actually made a strategic decision years back to get rid of almost all of its highest-yield weapons. We're talking about those massive, multi-megaton city erasers from the Cold War. So let's zoom out a bit and see how this choice fits into the bigger global picture. Because, the U.S. didn't make this decision in a vacuum, and its whole approach now stands in really sharp contrast to what its competitors are doing. Yeah, this table lays it out perfectly. You can really see the two different paths here. The source argues the U.S. has basically placed its bets on smaller, usable weapons. The goal, to signal control and restraint. But on the other side, Russia and China, they've reportedly gone all in on massive yield weapons, built for one thing and one thing only: total, overwhelming destruction. And just to give you some perspective on what yield really means, the U.S. used to have weapons like this one, 9 megatons. Just think about that. We're talking about a scale of pure destructive power that is it's not in the active U.S. arsenal anymore, not even close. So here's the bottom line. The American strategy, it's based on a totally different idea of how to win. It's a theory that says, hey, we can use a bunch of smaller, precise strikes to get the same result as one gigantic one. But the source argues that this theory, well, it has more to do with political messaging than it does with the actual physics of it all. Which, of course, brings up a really big question, right? If there's this huge gap between the story we're told and the actual physical reality of the arsenal, why isn't anyone talking about it? Why don't we ever talk about yield? Well, the analysis we're looking at offers let's just say, a pretty provocative answer. It suggests that this lack of public understanding, it's not an accident at all. The source actually calls this the logic of nuclear illiteracy. And the argument goes something like this. If the public actually understood concepts like yield, they'd start asking some really tough questions. Questions about strategy, about treaties, questions that would totally poke holes in that nice, neat reassurance story. And let's be honest, from a political point of view, it's just way easier to manage a simpler story. So what's the takeaway? It seems like the feeling of being secure is given a much higher priority than a real, detailed, public understanding of the physics that's supposed to make us secure in the first place. Okay, so why does any of this actually matter? What are the real-world stakes? Well, the source connects this whole narrative thing directly to the bedrock of nuclear deterrence. And it highlights the huge risks that pop up when a country's power isn't clearly understood by anyone. And the analysis also kind of zooms out even further, reminding us of something we honestly just don't think about. These things aren't just weapons. They're ecological forces. A big enough detonation can literally alter the land, change entire ecosystems, and reshape a part of the planet. And this quote just hits the nail on the head. It perfectly sums up the core risk here. Power misrepresented becomes power misunderstood, and power misunderstood becomes power misused. When we don't really get the true nature of our own power, the danger of using it badly goes way, way up. And in the end, it all comes back to deterrence, doesn't it? The source argues that stability, that fragile peace, it only holds when everybody at the table has a crystal clear, no-nonsense understanding of what the other side can do, their capacity for absolute, total destruction. The moment you get a gap between the story someone is telling and what they can actually do, well, that's when things get really dangerous and unstable. And so that leaves us with one final big question from this whole analysis to chew on. What are the real risks when the reassuring story a nation tells itself and tells the world starts to drift apart from the physical reality of the weapons it actually has? It is definitely something worth thinking about.